welcome to the Tuesday night situational update on high-path avian influenza for small flock stakeholders in Ontario. I'm Ashley Honsberger. I'm the Executive Director for Poultry Industry Council. And for those of you who are familiar, you've seen this before, we're supported through the CAP program in order to deliver this series every Tuesday until about December to make sure that we're keeping up to date, sharing best practices and some new information that might be helpful for you as you move through the fall migration season. And for those of you who are just joining us for the first time tonight, all of the links, the handouts, the recordings will be available in the coming days on the PIC website, and they're available here in the biosecurity and disease page. So all of the maps and any CFIA pages that are mentioned, you can access them through there. That way you don't have to scramble to write things down tonight. And I'll give one last kick at the can at promoting our emergency planning binder. We do have paper copies available, and we're looking forward to getting rid of the stack. So if you want to get yourself a copy or a producer in Ontario, just go to the Poultry Industry Council website and register to get one. Otherwise, the resource is live and it's really awesome, available through our website as well. Tonight we have a stacked deck. So we've got our usual suspects, our friends from Canadian Food Inspection Agency. We've got Dr. Luci and Al from OMAFRA, and they've also brought on someone from their team named Alex Léger, who's going to talk to us about how complaints are logged, as well as the process for compliance follow-up. We've also got an industry partner, Mark Beavens, who's going to talk about some proper cleaning and disinfecting practices. And then next week is going to follow up with a little more in-depth information. So tonight's a bit of a teaser. And then we've also got our folks from the wild bird side of things. Dr. Brian Stevens is going to give us a little bit of an update as well. I think I've named everybody. So you can see what's on the roster for tonight. So without further ado, we can get going. So Vaishnavi, I'll just invite you to come on screen here.
Thank you, Ashley. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Vaishnavi Kalsy. Most of you people know me by now, but I'm from Canadian Food Inspection Agency and act as the liaison officer for the AI response. Since last week, I'm just going to give you a quick update on what's been happening. Since last week's call, we have a new infected premise in Ontario, in St. Clements, which is numbered IP 36 and is called Township of Wellesley. It is going to be deemed as poultry commercial based on the information that we received, and we'll have a primary control zone around that. No other news so far, just one IP since the last Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaish. So I wrote down who's next. So Dr. Luci, come on up.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I guess it's my turn. I'm just going to share my screen now. So tonight we're going to talk about transporting to slaughter and then the ministry's order. There will be only two topics and I'll not have too many slides, but I think these two are very interesting to discuss about it. The first one, I kind of classified transporting to slaughter based on which zone you are. Either you are in a primary control zone or infected zone, or you are out of that zone. So, of course, we're starting with the primary control zone, and the question that everyone is posing probably it is an avian influenza infected premise allowed to process their birds. And based on what CFA classification was about 2 weeks ago, I believe, they classified the non-commercial primary control zone. General permit is required for all types of movement to slaughter. With the commercial primary control zone, the following will apply. If you're out or between the infected zone, that means 3 kilometers, you require a specific permit. Out or between restricted zone, between 3 and 10 kilometers, you do require a specific permit. Into infected or restricted zone, you need a general permit, and also out of between or into security zone, the 10 kilometers, it is a general permit required. Please visit the CFIA website and then find out where you're fitting with this location, and then ask for the permit that fits for your location. Now moving to if you're outside of the infected zones, and then I'm going to include here the OMAFRA Minister's order that is not prohibiting the transportation of birds to slaughter plants, but I would like you to consider some other things. there is, in case of mechanical break and the plant can't operate that day, let's say you bring the birds at the slaughter first in the morning, and then all of a sudden 10 o'clock and they cannot slaughter the birds anymore, then just consider that the birds, they can be taken back to the farm origin. And think about the return crates or other equipment back to the property only after they have been cleaned and disinfected. The reason why I'm saying that is because let's say if you do take your birds to the slaughter plants and you want to do a custom slaughter, like you have 200 or 100 birds, and that means you're going to bring your crates there. So I'm talking about only small flock at this point. Some of the small plants, especially the provincial ones, they do not have all of them. They don't have mechanical equipment to clean and disinfect the crates. So they will use a power washer, and then after that they will disinfect manually. So what that means, defects may appear, and then you may see a little bit of feces there and there. So I wanted to make sure that you take the crates very clean back, and that's not the case. Please inspect them when you get home, and then just give them a second clean up, and then give them a second disinfection, just to make sure that you do not bring anything at home. And then also make sure you clean and disinfect the vehicle and trailers, tires, and then be aware of where you clean the crates, and then make sure that the runoff can't get near your birds. It's very important, and you may not be aware. So I want to try to get every single possible away from your birds to get infected with avian influenza virus. What you would do if you encounter bird mortalities due to avian influenza? I remind you that all of these methods listed here on the slide must be approved by CFIA and other bylaws, depending where you're located. So let's say you have an urban flock, or you do have a small flock in a special, like in a municipality that they do special required things. So the birds that were dead from the avian influenza are considered hazardous waste and under the Environmental Management Act, and you do have several options to dispose this by landfill, and this is small volumes, on farm composting and burial, in and burning or incineration. But again, you have to have been approved by CFIA to do that, and then just please consult with them before you do anything. So the Ontario Minister's order, the order has been issued on September 23rd, and it has been extended until November 21st. Maybe some of you are aware, or maybe not, but this action was recommended based on the confirmed cases of avian influenza and domestic poultry in Ontario, but also as well is the large number of commingling events for October-November months, and this should help to mitigate the risk of disease spread from the premise to premise. On the right side of my slide, there's some information that you can take it to report in compliance, but we're going to have Alex, the next speaker, that is going to talk a little bit more in depth about that, because he is from the regulatory compliance unit. So just going to go again with what events are prohibited. And so they are commingling birds, such as bird shows, bird sales and swaps, portions of fairs where birds are exhibited, sport and educational displays where birds are brought from multiple locations, vaccination gatherings for birds from multiple locations, and prohibits the movement of birds to these events. Just give an example about it. I think we talked about it last a webinar where one of the infected premises came from a gathering, like an auction, and it kind of led to another 3 infected premises in Ontario and another 3 in Quebec. So it is very important, and that's why ministry, OMAFRA ministry, took extra caution to try to mitigate this risk of spreading the disease between flocks. Of course, we do have some exemption, and this is the list of what it is not covered by the order. There are slaughter plants, as we talked before. We have registered research or licensed supply facility. We have wildlife rehab centers where protected wildlife or game wildlife are kept in captivity. And any other entities that provides animal sheltering services, any site or location where activities may be undertaken by a pound keeper, pet stores or other permanent retail location where birds could be bought, sold, or traded, retail outlets that sell and distribute live chicks, veterinary facility, zoos, or similar animal businesses at the location where the birds are permanently housed, and of course, and activities where a person is lawfully exercising aboriginal or treaty rights. And that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That's a really great overview. I forgot to mention that any questions, please just feel free to pop them down in the Q&A and we'll save them till the end of the presentations. So next we're going to hear from Alex Léger.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the invite. It's my first time here. I am the Operations Liaison for Intelligence Officer with the Regulatory Compliance Unit of OMAFRA. Okay, so when you're reaching out for non-compliance, I want to give a little bit of basic information. So for the non-compliance with the Minister's Order for AI, you would reach out to OMAFRA. You also reach out to us for other times you have belief that regulated activities without a license are occurring, whether that's slaughter or anything like that, you can reach out to us. Or if you have any issue with the OMAFRA licensed facility, you can also reach out to us. If you are looking for something particular with avian influenza, CFIA is the lead, and so if it's something not related to the minister's order, we encourage you to contact CFIA. If you've got complaints about import, export regarding any foodstuffs or anything like that, that's CFIA. Labeling issues with poultry issues, things like that, CFIA. We frequently work public health units on food premise cleanliness and things like that. So if you have any complaints related to those, we ask that you contact your local public health unit or any home-based businesses not conducting regulated activities. This is sort of more general information, not sort of AI specific. We also obviously partner with all the other ministries in the province. So some of the stuff that we're looking at today, whether it's burial, disposal of dead poultry, that might fall under MECP. If you're looking at wildlife, that might be MNRF. So there's a number of other partners, but particularly with regards to the non-compliance of the minister's orders, we're the ones you want to be calling. So how does our unit receive complaints? We receive complaints from the public, either on phone, by email, or through our online SurveyMonkey tool. We receive complaints through external partners, whether that's the Poultry Industry Council or other partners through those same mechanisms. If you report stuff to a program area within OMAFRA, then they have an internal way of sending us complaints, which come complete with a form they have to fill out and kind of process they have to follow. And then you can also just reach out directly to RCU staff, such as myself, by a call or email to report complaints. That's how they generally come in. What happens when a complaint comes into the regulatory compliance unit? We determine jurisdiction, so we try to make sure that whether or not it is something that OMAFRA can actually do something about. So whether or not we have inspection authority or investigation authority to actually address the issue at hand. So in the first slide where I sort of said, where do you go? If it's a complaint about a restaurant or if it's a complaint about birds coming in from the States, that's not going to be anything that OMAFRA will be able to address. We will refer it to the appropriate partner, but our first step is determining jurisdiction. We then conduct a risk assessment to triage the priority of our files. So food safety files, AI files, things that have high risk to either animal welfare or human health are prioritized over other kind of low risk non-compliance files that we deal with. We do 13 different pieces of legislation. So we do everything from labeling of honey to non-compliance with the minister's order for AI. So we triage those things. And then depending on the outcome of that risk assessment determines whether we conduct inspection or investigation activity. We will not share the results of inspections or investigations. There are privacy concerns. Once we've been to a location and we've compelled information from an operator, from a business, much like you wouldn't want us sharing your dirty laundry or your business practices, with your competitors, we don't share the results of inspections. Investigations, if they result in a charge, that would be public information at the time of the operator being charged. Generally, following an inspection or investigation, there is follow-up at the location to make sure that compliance is maintained. And if you are the complainant, we may follow up with you as well to let you know that we have completed our action, although we won't give you any of the juicy details. So where do you submit complaints? Dr. Luci mentioned these sort of things. So we have a website, food compliance. There is a link to this SurveyMonkey link. So this is the actual SurveyMonkey link. If you want to remain anonymous, the SurveyMonkey link is the only link you can use to actually remain anonymous. If you submit a complaint through the email or through the contact center, then your name is logged and could end up in court if the compliance process ends up in court. So if you truly want to remain anonymous, please use the SurveyMonkey link. And when it comes time to fill out your name and that kind of information, say, I want to remain anonymous, and leave it blank. Okay, it will still submit. You can still submit complaints blank. So that is the complaint process in the Regulatory Compliance Unit at OMAFRA. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. That really paints a really clear picture. Is there any indication on how frequently the non-compliance line gets used, or any sort of volume?
So for AI complaints, we've had very few.
That's great.
It's very few. I mean, considering that the order is pretty specific in what it covers, Dr. Luci mentioned commingling events and things like that nature. So selling birds directly one-on-one with farmers is not illegal and not covered by the minister's order. So most of our complaints are around bird shows and larger things like that, but we haven't had very many.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you. Okay, we're going to get the infamous Aldam up here.
I'm going to talk today about deadstock and managing your deadstock in a way to not bring high path AI onto your flock. We are back into it again, hot and heavy, and it's and we'll get this from Brian and Chris later. We haven't even begun to see some of the silliness that we saw in the spring yet. So looking at this, when it comes to disposal of your dead, so we're not talking about an infected flock where CFIA is involved and they're in charge. This is your day-to-day stuff. You need to follow the federal, provincial, and municipal regulations and guidelines depending upon where you are. And you need to choose a method that suits your needs, whether it's rendering, composting, burial, incineration, disposal vessels. So this is not composting. I've had some people try and tell me that's composting. That is not composting. That's throwing your deads in the manure pile. You need to manage your compost, and we see this crap all the time. If you are doing stuff like this, and this is feeling a bit of Brian's thunder, but we are seeing some scavengers with avian influenza showing up at the lab. So this is a great way to bring the disease right to your flock. You don't want to see this kind of stuff. So natural disappearance is not a proper way of disposing of your deads. I've had guys say, well, I just bring them up to the back bush and they just disappear. So one, that's legal. Two, that's dumb from a biosecurity standpoint. You want to create that problem and create a headache for CFA and have all your birds destroyed. Maybe that's your choice then, but this is not what we want to see out there. It's not a proper way of disposing of your dead. If you're on farm and you're in an ag area, on farm dead animal disposal falls under the Nutrient Management Act. Off farm disposal falls under the Food Safety and Quality Act. Your options are rendering, compost, burial, disposal vessels. I have incineration with a question mark there because there's some caveats about incineration. It's not a burn barrel that you use rubber boots and old motor oil. It is much more involved in that, and anaerobic digesters, and I should put a question mark there too because that's really not an option for our small flock. So when it comes to rendering, it's usually not viable because of cost. If you've got a small amount of deads, Composting is a great way to manage your dead stock. It can be effective, but it has to be managed properly. Burial is definitely an option, but it depends on location and volume. And when I say location, it's both on a volumetric basis on how many kilos per acre you can bury, but also depending upon where you are. If you're on sand or on bedrock or a high water table, burial may not be an option. Incineration for our small flock folks, it's not an option to do properly. And yes, I've heard of folks just trying to burn carcasses and create that barbecue. And if you guys are doing that and the neighbors don't like the smell of burnt feathers, it is as Alex said, it's MECP. Someone from the Ministry of Environment will come out. And if you do not have a proper incinerator, you're now potentially facing orders and fines. Disposal vessels and anaerobic digesters are generally not viable on this because you guys won't have one on the property. You may not have one, and we really don't want you taking your deads to folks that have disposal vessels or anaerobic digesters. And yes, I get asked all the time about, can I just throw my birds in the municipal garbage? Not really an option because your deads are a biohazard, and I don't think your garbage collection folks are paid to deal with waste. And I get the question all the time, well, I throw chicken I buy at the grocery store in the garbage, what's the difference? Well, that chicken that you've bought at the grocery store has been inspected by an inspector, has been deemed safe to eat, and then you've brought it home and managed it, and now you're disposing it that way. Your dead bird, we don't know what it died from. So that becomes a biohazard waste. So most municipalities aren't really keen on you throwing your bird in the garbage. Now, when it comes to some of the educational resources, I just wanted to show you real quick what we have. So flip it back to all the OMAFRA pages. So once again, we have our avian influenza page, which is essentially ontario.ca/avian influenza. That'll bring you to this page where you can see things like the order and a lot of other information about AI. But we actually have a dead stock page, a dead stock disposal page that carries a lot of information in regards to all livestock. So you'll see things here for cattle and poultry and for swine. But we do have a best management practices book that you can order online that talks about this. But we have a pile of this information that is chunked out of that into some of our dead stock disposal options. So on farm, you can see I've already started going through this as to how you can deal with your dead stock, what your options are. Disposal on farm, and chickens, turkeys, geese, ducks, guinea fowl, like feathers are part of that. So and ratites. So all livestock and poultry are part of the dead stock. Like I said, when it comes to your options, we have composting, and we've got some pictures here of this is us doing a trial with composting of old hens. This is the good old 3-bin composter, and it's a great option for it. We have some in-vessel composting systems that can be used. Incineration, so that's the question mark around. A ETV certified incinerator is not a burn barrel. It is one that includes an afterburner that and these are not cheap units. I know of run between $80,000 and $100,000 to purchase, and then there's the fueling cost on top of that. Disposal vessels can be used, not really a great option for small flock folks. Burial is an option that we use, but there is a limit on amount of kilos that can go into a burial pit. There's limits as to where it can go in terms of distances from field drain tiles and also the amount of overburden you need. So you need to bury it deep enough that you don't have scavenging. So there's lots of information on our site. You can just go to that dead stock page and go from there. We've got lots of good information about in-bin composting. And this is one we put up because of COVID. This is for large flock depopulation where you've got some options as to where your deads can go. And then finally, looking at some of the issues around dead stock, why we are so concerned about managing your dead stock properly comes down to something we put out in May. So we have AI in the province, and not to steal some of Brian's thunder, but we are seeing scavengers again, turkey vultures and other scavengers are being brought to the lab positive for avian influenza. So if you're not managing your deads, whether you're not burying them properly, not composting properly, or just bring them out to the bush, you could be bringing some of these scavengers to your farm, to your flock that may have AI. And you guys have heard from Bash and from us before what happens if you guys have avian influenza on your farm. Once you let that genie out of the bottle, it's not going back in. You start a process that you cannot redirect. Once you're high path avian influenza positive on your farm, everything gets destroyed in pretty much as brutal a term as I can say, and then dealing with that. So anyways, this information is out there. I can't remember, I think this page may be on the biosecurity and disease page for PIC. If not, we'll put it on there. But this becomes part of the reason why dead stock management is so critical, and becomes even more critical in the fall, because the cold weather, the cool weather will let that virus exist longer in the environment. So that means we just have more opportunity for that disease to spread. So with that, I think that takes me back to that's all. Pass it back to Ashley, and then we can keep going on with the presentations.
Thanks, Al. Those are really great visuals that you've got there on the OMAFRA site. So thanks for sharing those. Now I'm going to invite Mark to come on screen.
Thanks, Ashley. Hello, everyone. My job tonight is I've been asked to give 5 or 6 minutes of just general tips and guidance in terms of the cleaning and disinfection. I think my role, though, is going to be is to convince you that you want to do, whatever you have to do to not get a high pathogenic avian influenza onto your premise, because this cleaning and disinfection process, if you do have HPAI, is extremely stressful. I've been involved in, I was involved in actually personally responsible for the C&D of IP2 and IP3 in 2015. And I have been involved as a consultant on a number of the infected premises this spring and into the summer. And it is, as I said, an extremely stressful process. It's not your normal cleaning and disinfection process that that I'm sure, as all good producers, small flock or commercial, that you follow every time, every year in your normal practice. It's a cleaning and disinfection, the cleaning and disinfection standard that needs to be met. In the case of high path AI is levels above what you're normally used to. So in that regard, the process works that once you've got through the destruction and the disposal, it's now on to, CFIA is kind of handing it over to you to do the cleaning and disinfection. And whether you do it yourself or contract it out, there is a very strict process, a regimented process to go through. So before you even start, standard operating, procedures, protocols need to be written and approved by CFIA. These include things like what disinfectant you're going to be using, what cleaner you're going to be using, or is it an all-in-one chemistry? What dilutions are you going to be using? What's the PPE? The whole process has to be written out in terms of how you're going to do that cleaning and disinfection step. Once you start, as I said, it's very time consuming. Where a normal barn cleaning in a commercial operation may take 1 or 2 days, depending on the size of the barn. This literally takes 1 to 2 weeks per barn. It's just the biggest thing is that while you're cleaning, there cannot be any organic material left in that premise, in that facility. So before you get the approval to disinfect. And when I say any organic material, I literally mean any organic material. And we all know that's very, hard to fathom when you're talking into a normal barn or even a small flock operation. Farming is not a clean operation when we talk about sterile or food processing. No, I mean, there is dirt and there is manure. That all has to be removed, and it is very, very time consuming. Things to watch when CFIA actually comes in to do their inspection after your cleaning step. They're looking for that organic material to make sure that the job has been done. They actually come in with, the white glove test, if you want to call it that. And they're going to be looking in areas where you may have forgotten or missed over. And you don't want to get into that position where they're saying, no, you have to do more, because it's just a back and forth. And as I said, it causes a lot of stress. We have to respect CFIA as a job to do. And we have to do our part as producers, whether it's small flock or commercial, to meet those standards. So things to look for in terms of that: standing water. There can be no standing water before you get the approval to disinfect. Areas where cracks in concrete or cement, those are harbors of organic material. You need to pay special attention to those. Eaves and the air intakes, or that kind of where there's air movement. There's air movement, there's dust and or biofilm, organic, dander, that kind of thing, and they're going to be looking for those. So as I said, not to scare you, but it's a very lengthy and onerous process to deal with a high path AI on the cleaning and disinfection. However, if you are the unfortunate that you end up having it, it is a process that others have gone before, and so there's resources out there to assist you, whether it be CFIA, OMAFRA, industry, or the private sector. There are those of us out there that are able to assist. Next week, I'll be back and actually have a little bit more time to go through some proper cleaning and disinfection protocols, both in peacetime and unfortunately in the wartime. And I look forward to that point in time where we can actually talk about the science of disinfection and the importance of cleaning ahead of disinfection. And I think you'll find that it will be an educational process. And as I said, hopefully tonight, though, I've convinced you to do all those other processes, having strict biosecurity protocols, following Al's suggestions in regards to handling dead stock, that sort of thing, to do whatever you can to make sure you do not, under any circumstances, get high path AI on your premise.
Thank you, Mark. That kind of picks up on a couple of things Luci had talked about last week, which was a little bit of the science. So we're curious to learn more about the types of products that are effective on different virus and bacteria types as well, because soap isn't soap kind of thing. So thank you for sharing that. So we are going to invite Dr. Brian Stevens on, the man whose thunder might have been stolen, but I'm pretty sure you still have interesting tidbits to share here.
Thanks, Ashley. So yeah, so we continue to see mostly Canada geese as the main wild animal that's being affected by avian influenza. We continue to get a handful of Canada geese every week that are dying from this disease. But as Al had mentioned in his brief talk, that we've started to see it in scavengers quite a bit more over the past few weeks. So turkey vultures in particular, similar to what we saw in the spring. We're starting to get turkey vultures showing up with avian influenza test positive. As well, we're starting to get into mammals right now. So a few weeks ago, we had our first red fox that tested positive. So similar to the spring, we had a number of red foxes in the spring that had died from this disease, and we got our first one just now. And then the past few days, we received a skunk from the Milton area. And this was a skunk that was found in a neighborhood. There were actually two that had been found dead. We received one of them. and that one did test positive for avian influenza as well. And that's similar to what they've seen in other areas of North America. And we're going to continue to see more and more of these scavengers pop up over the next few weeks to months. And that's because there's more birds that are dead on the landscape, and they're going to be scavenging on them and picking up the virus from them. So you definitely want to avoid attracting any wildlife to your property, similar to what Al had mentioned with his talk. If you want to keep up to date on what we're seeing at CWHC, best place to go is our website. And if you click on the avian influenza tab, you will get to our main avian influenza page. And on there, you can find biweekly reports. And that'll just download a PDF for you showing what we've detected over the previous 2 weeks. So the report that came out 3 weeks ago, I believe we in Ontario had a 30% positivity rate. So that's the number of animals that we're testing and the percent positive. And then the one that came out about a week ago, it was up to about 40%. So we're seeing those numbers rising right now. And that's similar to what we saw in the spring, where we kind of had that hump-shaped curve where it kind of starts off slow. And then over the next few weeks, we've started to see numbers increase until we're in the spring, we got to about 50% of the cases we were testing. And I expect that the fall, we're going to get close to that over the next few weeks. And then the only other thing I want to mention, as I do every week, if you have any inkling that you found a sick wild animal or you find a dead wild animal on the landscape, please contact us at the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. And we will do our best to get those animals in for testing and try and figure out exactly what's going on with it. And that helps us kind of track this disease and figure out where it is on the landscape. And that is all I have for tonight, and I'm happy to answer questions in a little bit.
So we have a question about on-farm burial practices. Do you bury the carcasses in plastic bags, or how does that work?
No, don't do that. You're just going to entomb the carcass and make it a gooey mess. So, and from an environmental standpoint, it's not a great idea either. Now, when we're dealing with infected carcasses or anything like that, I think is maybe the question becomes if we're moving birds off site for CFIA, like there is a double bag and disinfect protocol. Maybe, I don't know if there's a confusion, but yeah, generally we don't like burying plastic.
Okay. So we have a question about traveling. So is it okay to travel to a show from Ontario to a show that's outside of Ontario into a jurisdiction where there's not an order prohibiting bird shows or sales? So maybe you're going out of province to a neighboring province.
Okay, so, right, I can't help myself. All right, so this is a perfect example of what may have happened when someone goes to a show or an auction and there's AI there, and then what happens? You bring it home or you bring it somewhere else. So in the grand scheme of things, because it's not illegal there, doesn't mean it's right. We're in a very critical state right now in terms of our disease status in Ontario. You really want to be bringing disease back into the province? Secondly, do you want to be in a show out of province and then end up in a zone that, what happens if you're in US, Quebec, wherever, and then they end up having a disease outbreak either at the show or in a location that's within a 10K zone of where your birds are? Guess what? Your birds are not coming back into this country. So anyways, I'm done. Someone else answer the rest of it.
So I see Alex has his hand up here.
Yeah, I would agree with Al. I'd go one step further in that the minister's order prohibits the transport of birds via broker transporters to attend a commingling event. So if you're using a broker transporter, it doesn't specify where the event is for the transportation of the birds to be prohibited. So if you're using a broker transporter and you transport those birds, you are in contravention of the minister's order.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm in agreement with both of you guys. So.
Good. That's a great question, though, because there's a lot of clarification around the scenario. So we appreciate the question. Does So we have a question about, is there any agency that's monitoring waterfowl when they're at their summer nesting grounds? Maybe Chris wants to pick that up.
Yeah, sure. I can answer that one. So thanks for the question, John. Basically, every agency that handled waterfowl or water birds this summer did avian influenza testing. So we have annual programs that take place throughout the country. Could be colonial nesting seabirds and in Atlantic Canada, Arctic nesting geese, even our temperate breeding Canada geese in Southern Ontario. So we have sampling that occurred in all of those populations. Some of those results are still coming in, so I can't comment on those yet, but yes, we did do an extensive monitoring program this year, bigger than any year we've ever had before.
Okay. And do you want to carry on with the question about the typical fall wild bird migration? What's the pace? Is it going to slow down or does it stop anytime soon?
Yeah, sure. So I think sometimes people show maps of millions of birds migrating at night. It starts in August. Those are typically not the birds that we tend to think of when we talk about avian influenza. Those are mostly songbirds that are migrating in those huge numbers. Right now is when we really get into the migration of the water birds and the waterfowl that we typically think of as potential carriers of avian influenza. And that's really just starting now. So now we're starting to see birds come out of the Arctic, come out of the boreal forest, come out of the prairie Canada, and move into Southern Ontario. That movement probably continues from about now or early October right through to November, and then the movement slows down. But for Southwestern Ontario especially, with the climate there, we anticipate seeing large numbers of migratory birds all winter. And as Al alluded to, this virus loves cooler temperatures and concentrations of birds. So as lakes and rivers start to freeze up and these birds congregate, that's when it can really spread rapidly throughout the wild bird population. So it's probably going to get a little worse before it gets any better.
And
I
what were
remember the first case we've had in Newfoundland in December, and it was freezing cold there.
right.
You can keep the virus alive in a freezer for a long time, and in a couple months, the landscape will be a freezer. So,
Right.
Chris, do you want to mention about what's going on out in Western Canada versus here, like, you know, in terms of wild bird migration? Because we've seen a lot of commercial positives in the West and not that many here.
yeah, so I mean, Prairie Canada is further ahead in migration than what we are. So, well, they start off with more birds than we do as well, but birds tend to come out of the Arctic down into Prairie Canada. There's a lot of agriculture there, as we all know, and they concentrate there first. So that's a little bit of a early warning for us. Many of those species come across from prairie, like people tend to think birds migrate north-south, but there's a lot of east-west migration too. And those birds will end up, some of those birds will end up in Southern Ontario. And we see that now with some of the diving ducks arriving that were in Manitoba a couple of weeks ago, and now they're in Southwestern Ontario. So, I think poultry producers should see what's happening in Prairie Canada and take that as a thing, a potential thing of warning of things to come, and use it as a opportunity to tighten down your biosecurity and remove any attractants that you might have on your property that might attract migratory birds.
And I think one thing I want to add is that in 2015, Chris and I dealt with this, and we still deal with this on the small flock side, where a lot of small flock folks still think this is a commercial bird problem, right? And yes, when it's into a commercial farm, it is horrible because it's a lot of cost, it's a lot of heartache, it's the person's livelihood. But almost all our positives in Ontario have been small flock, exhibition birds. So like up to this point, we've seen a lot of wild bird interaction with those positives. We've seen a lot of, I don't want to say poorer biosecurity, but as far as the disease goes, it doesn't really matter where Brian gets these birds delivered to him from the lab to the lab, right? Assume it's everywhere. And then it is up to you to prevent it from not getting into your flock.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Al. I mean, maybe people got caught, they got complacent through the summer when we weren't seeing detections, but now it's fall. We know it's here. The wild bird data shows that it's here, that Brian talked about. We have it in poultry in Ontario, and I mean, from the wild bird side, it's everywhere in the province. It's not just in southwestern Ontario. It's not just in eastern Ontario. I think it's a fair assumption that it's everywhere, and so don't assume that you're safe because you haven't heard it's around your facility.
Thinking the order doesn't apply to you, I struggle with this because the order is designed to prevent disease spread. When I have people trying to figure out the nuances of it, go whether or not it actually applies to them, once again, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And the reason we extend it is because the risk is high. The reason we are seeing some of the IPs we're seeing is because there have been spreader events. By spreader events, I mean auctions, buy-sell trades, things people that should know better are doing that they've done. So anyways, that's just, sorry, I got to get that rant out because that's where we're at.
Heard. So we have a question about someone whose birds were on show for the summer at a facility, and the facility's closing down because it's the end of the season. But in light of the minister's order around transport of birds, how can this person go about picking them up?
To me, this looks like more like a special request that I think it needs to be weighted by the ministry. If so, the order, it is meant to end up November 21st. I don't know if Keith, the person that asked this question, can prolong to have the birds to stay there until the end of the order, or request the ministry for a special extent that needs to be reconsidered and move on. That's what I will see, but I will try first to see if the birds can be kept there until November 21st.
Okay, and so the exemption, where would they request that through?
They should go through the AC center.
That 1-800?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So the 1-800 number is obviously on the OMAFRA website, and it's also on the PIC website. So hopefully that's helpful, Keith. I had a question for Mark that we meant to ask while you were presenting about cleaning and disinfecting porous surfaces. So oftentimes commercial barns have like a hard plastic surface or concrete. How do you deal with porous surfaces? You're on mute. Sorry.
There we go. The porous surface, first of all, disinfectants are labeled. Their label claim is a hard surface disinfectant. But as you're correctly noted, that there are certain surfaces, for example, wood or cardboard, that are more porous than the hard plastic. Disinfectants will still work, but you want to make sure that you choose a disinfectant that is very effective. Some things you need to be wary of also is on clothing. Some disinfectants may stain versus others, but they will actually still be somewhat effective on even on soft surfaces like that. The main thing is to follow the guidelines on your disinfectant. Choose disinfectants that have a fast contact time, that are foaming is something that no matter what disinfectant you use, We always encourage foaming because that increases the surface adhesion of the chemistry, and it can penetrate those small pores a little bit better that way, and it's getting a longer contact time on those surfaces. So that would be something also that you'd want to take into consideration.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So we're back to the migration story. Were there any positive cases in the testing of the summer grounds?
Yeah, so for our Canada Goose work that we did, we sampled about 250 Canada geese from Windsor to Cornwall. All that work and all the PPE and all the cleaning we did, and we didn't generate a single positive during that period. Similarly, the Canada Goose banding that happened up in James Bay and Hudson Bay also didn't have any positives. In the month of August, and I'm just speaking for things that I'm aware of in Ontario, we did boreal duck banding along the Highway 11 corridor at sewage lagoons, basically from the Quebec border to about Hearst. That yielded only 3% non-negative results, so a really low, a fairly low prevalence. Since then, the results that have come in have been much higher, 30, 25%. We've had sites that have been 90% prevalence. Now, those data are a little bit different because those birds were concentrated on corn, so it probably isn't super representative of what is generally happening on the landscape. But I think assuming that in the month of August, about 25–30% prevalence in dabbling ducks is probably reasonable. And the interesting thing is, when these mallards at these sites had no symptoms at all. They were actively feeding, they could fly, they were asymptomatic, but shedding virus. So I think that's an important thing to notice, that just because a bird looks healthy doesn't mean it doesn't represent a risk to your flock. So and those results are across Southern Ontario. So again, assume it's everywhere and be safe.
You got your hand up there, Mark?
Yeah, Chris, did you want to comment on, one of the things that we've heard anecdotal evidence of is the issue of crows, where American crows are migratory, but some are also residential. They pose a unique situation in regards to that. I know a couple of producers, actually multiple producers in Quebec, for example, they're convinced that their positives came through the crow population. Are you seeing any evidence of that at all in terms of sampling, or?
So I haven't done any sampling with crows, and Brian might be able to answer, but I think crows have shown up in sick and dead bird surveillance. I think it's typically thought that as a wild bird scavenger, that's probably the route of transmission there. But yeah, Brian might be able to comment better on the crow question than I can.
Yeah, we have had a handful of crows and ravens that have tested positive for AIV and have died from it. So we suspect that they are similar to other wildlife, that they're scavenging on these birds on the landscape, and that's where they're picking it up. And this comes back to us talking about songbirds and other wild birds that we don't necessarily worry about all the time with avian influenza, though they can be vectors for the virus as well. So yes, they could potentially bring it to a farm on their feet, on their body, some other way, bringing objects from one area to another. So they can definitely transport the virus from one place to another. So in general, when we talk about wildlife, it's just more trying to deter them from coming onto property, because they could be infected with the virus, or they could bring it some other way to the property.
Well, that's where screening over your inlets, making sure you're changing boots, making sure you're dealing with the dead stock becomes real critical to prevent that transmission as much as you can, whether it's as a vector or as a sick bird.
So there's a question about like, why is this year seem so bad versus the previous years of outbreak, which was the 2015-16 window?
So I can start this, and then maybe my colleagues can add to the explanation. So avian influenza A has low pathogenic and highly pathogenic subtypes. The highly pathogenic ones are H5, H7. We're watching in Europe how they were struggling back in 2021 in the spring with this highly pathogenic H5N1, and eventually came down to us in December last year. The reason why we do have such a big hit on the small flocks and then on the other poultry, it's because of the chickens were like the poultry are naive to this subtype. So being naive, they get high mortality and then it gets spread very quickly.
2015, 2016 was an H5N2. So it's just like the flu shot that the flu we get every fall, right? Like it mutates, it changes. This is the strain that's going to impact us more. This Eurasian strain H5N1 has been particularly brutal, and I'll get Chris or Brian to talk about its impact on wild birds, which is something we've never seen before.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big difference this current outbreak is just that high path AI, so H5 influenza, is circulating broadly in wild birds. In the previous outbreaks, we would have detections in wild birds, but nothing like we are seeing now. And oftentimes it was detected in poultry before it was detected in wild birds in Canada. So it's just the risk is greater, I think, with H5N1 circulating in healthy wild birds. And now there's just that much more opportunity. All it takes is one mistake for it to get into a barn, and then there you go. Now you have a high path AI infection.
This disease is host adapted to waterfowl, like ducks specifically, right? So when it jumps species into swans, Canada geese, scavengers, that's where we're seeing some of these challenges, these neurological issues, and then jumping into mammalian species. We've had pet bird folks on the call, like on these webinars, and they're terrified of it too, because we don't know, but I don't want to find out if a macaw that's worth thousands of dollars will get high path AI. So yeah, there's a lot of folks that are very concerned.
Fair enough. So there's a question about what type of small flocks have been hit in general.
Is that a Vash question?
It is probably. So we have seen majority on the chickens side of things, but there have been mixtures. So especially in fall, we have had like small flocks which had like multiple species present. So it's like chickens, we have had like geese, turkeys, there have been sites with pigeons too. So it's like a mixture rather than just being what we have seen in spring with more commercial producers with just poultry in that.
Okay. That's good, thank you. So there's a question about the specifics about the minister's order. Why does the order not cover private sales as it does in the BC order?
It seems like the BC order is a little bit more complex or maybe more strict, I would say. Back in the spring, I remember there were like 3 provinces and us too, like Ontario, where they were released orders or at least recommendations. The difference between recommendation and the order is the order you have to comply with. Recommendation is like a kind of voluntary thing. I think it's based on each province and also based on the high risk or risk possibilities of getting avian influenza. So we saw a lot of infected premises in the West, and then probably that contributed to on the list on the high risk possibilities of getting more spread of avian influenza between the flocks.
The BC order actually references some of the spreader events that have happened in Ontario that have impacted Ontario and Quebec.
Mm.
So they've also had the benefit of putting their order after ours to look at some of the other potentials where disease has been spread.
Mm. Okay. Are there any other questions floating around? And how was your chance? Seeing none, I would just like to extend again, thanks for everyone for being online tonight participating, and thanks for everyone who presented. We're going to have another session next week with a couple different presentations. Some people, last week. Oh, thank you, Gary. Yep, so we'll see you all next week. Thanks for joining, and until then, please remember your strict biosecurity measures, because that's what's going to get us past the finish line safely.
Thank you, everyone.